Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York in Bayside, Queens. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone, especially our distinguished guests, Director Elan Golod and producer Melanie Vi Levy, who will discuss their documentary film, Nathan-ism, tonight. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center is very grateful for the support of Queensborough President Donovan Richards, Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz, and New York State Assemblywoman Nili Rosick, all of whom will offer comments right now.
Hi, I'm Queensborough President Donovan Richards, and welcome to the Kupferberg Holocaust Center's virtual commemoration of Yom HaShoah, also known as Holocaust Remembrance Day. Today we come together to mourn the 6 million Jews and millions of others who were murdered by the Nazi regime and its allies. Their senseless and cruel deaths were a horrific tragedy that is almost beyond comprehension. The horror was so great that the world has since consistently pledged to never let such a catastrophe happen again. But although the Holocaust may have ended 79 years ago, the anti-Semitism that led to it has not. And due to the persistence of anti-Semitism and other forms of violent hatred, our world's commitment to the pledge of never again remains under continuous challenge. Challenges to that pledge will persist and become even greater as time continues to pass by. That begs the question of what can we do to make sure that the Holocaust doesn't fade from public consciousness? The Kupferberg Holocaust Center has long been trying to find answers to this question. And tonight's event is a critical step forward in that process. It's also more important than ever with anti-Semitism and Holocaust denialism on the rise, especially in the wake of the October 7th attacks. I visited Israel in the wake of October 7th, the worst attack against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And I've seen how that terror has divided people right here in New York City. But what has never been clearer to me is the need to call out anti-Semitism when we see it, because allowing it to take hold opens the door to more hate and more violence. If we've learned anything from the Holocaust, is that we all have an obligation to each other to root out hate. It must be our shared goal as human beings. We have a duty to keep the memory of the Holocaust alive so we never forget what can happen when hate is allowed to fester. So I thank the Kupferberg Holocaust Center for convening tonight's event. I'm proud Queens is home to such a worldwide leader in the study of the Holocaust and its legacy. And I hope tonight's event leads to further advances in our understanding of the Holocaust and how it remains relevant to us today. It is events like these that bring us closer to a world free of all forms of hate and violence. Thank you so much. May God be with you all during this difficult time.
On Yom HaShoah, a day commemorated by Jewish communities worldwide, we solemnly remember the 6 million Jews and the millions of others murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. That is why I am grateful to the leadership of the Kupferberg Holocaust Center of Queensborough Community College for preserving the memories of those who lived through the horrors of the Shoah, so their experiences are never forgotten. In remembrance of their lives, we vow never again. With anti-Semitism on the rise around the world after the terrorist attacks against Israel on October 7th, we are steadfast in our mission to combat misinformation on the history of the Holocaust with awareness, education, and action. Today and every day we stand in solidarity with the Jewish community, both at home and abroad, with the members of the institutions that have been attacked because of their Jewish affiliation, and anyone who has been victims of anti-Semitic crimes. This is the challenge of our time. In 2023 alone, Queens experienced a 40% increase in hate crimes with a significant spike in the number of anti-Jewish crimes. As DA of the most diverse county in the world, my administration remains committed to vanquishing anti-Semitism and all forms of racism, religious hatred, and xenophobia. That's why, in recognition of these alarming and dangerous trends, I established the borough's first dedicated hate crimes bureau within 6 months of taking office. one of the first in the nation committed exclusively to preventing, investigating, and prosecuting hate crimes committed against all targeted groups. Additionally, we hosted a briefing with local Jewish community and clergy leaders with Brian Peace, the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, to address local and federal safety concerns. Because we know our fight against bigotry must be holistic and it must be wide-reaching. Through education, activism, and a shared vision of protecting our Jewish neighbors, we will continue to combat anti-Semitism by collectively shaping a future of inclusivity and acceptance both here in Queens and across the globe. So as we pause today in memory of victims and survivors of the Holocaust, let us remember the precious lives and memories that teach us why it is important not only to remember, but also to act. And let these actions be a legacy that is worthy of the memories of our lost loved ones, and may their memories be for a blessing. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. This is Assemblywoman Neely Rosick coming to you from Albany. I am so sorry that I can't be with you during tonight's program as session is still going, but I wanted to send my heartfelt thanks to Laura and her entire team at the Kupferberg Center for creating this annual event, pulling it together and sharing it with all of you. Today on Yom HaShoah, we remember the millions of lives lost in the Holocaust and honor the survivors who endured unimaginable atrocities. We must never forget the horrors of the past and remain vigilant against hatred and discrimination in all of its forms. I hope that we come together tonight and every night to ensure that the lessons of history are never forgotten and that we work tirelessly to create a world of tolerance, understanding, and acceptance for all. Now more than ever, this is so important. This year, I'm announcing that the state budget actually included for the first time an investment of $500,000 to review and update curriculum on the Holocaust as anti-Semitism continues to rise across the state. The ADL recently reported that anti-Semitic incidents rose by 110% last year, with incidents of harassment up 226% in New York alone. 1 in 5 Americans ages 18 to 39 think the Holocaust was a myth. We need to bring better standards and better curriculum to all New York public schools, point blank. We cannot raise a generation of Holocaust deniers, and we need to learn from the past so that history does not repeat itself. I'm the daughter of a Holocaust educator who for a very long time has championed the continued education of our next generation, because far too often we've seen history repeating itself over and over and over again. As the last survivors, the numbers keep dwindling. We need to ensure that the next generation has access to the right information about the Holocaust, because we've seen hatred rearing its ugly head in our classrooms, on our college campuses, and in our communities. We cannot say never forget. We have to always say never again. So I thank you all for gathering tonight. I wish it were under better circumstances, and hopefully in the future we will be raising a generation that understands the lessons of the Holocaust and hatred in all of its forms. Thank you.
We're very grateful for the ongoing support of our elected officials in our mutual quest to create an inclusive democracy founded upon our collective humanity and respect for human rights. The KHC, in collaboration with Queensborough Community College's Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Center, is also proud to have recently partnered with the educational organization Facing History and Ourselves on a training for diversity officers across the City University of New York system to help them better identify and combat incidents of anti-Semitism. Our event this evening is underwritten by the Yehoshua and Edna Eisenberg Holocaust Memorial Fund. Rabbi Eisenberg, as he was known, was a longtime scholar in residence here at the KHC, who wrote as well as curated many of our center's most powerful exhibitions. Tonight's co-sponsors include the Ray Walpole Institute for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at Western Washington University, the Resnick Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center in White Plains, and the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University. Now, to kick things off, please join me in welcoming tonight's moderator, Marissa Hollywood. Marissa is the longtime associate director at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, where she manages operations, leads educational initiatives, and develops public programming. Since joining the staff in 2012, she's the heartbeat of the organization and has helped to increase the number of academic departments, faculty, and students using the center to supplement their curricula and better engage in history. And prior to this position, Marissa was executive director of the Queens Historical Society, a cultural institution and historic house museum focusing on the history of the entire borough of Queens. She's also worked at the Sands Point Preserve, Old Bethpage Village Restoration, the Cradle of Aviation Air and Space Museum, and various public and private libraries. She's also a doctoral candidate at St. John's University studying English literature with a focus in cultural studies and has published multiple books on the history of Long Island. Marissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening for the Kupferberg Holocaust Center annual Yom HaShoah commemoration. Each year, we strive to produce an event that focuses on the legacy of Holocaust memory. How are scholars in the field finding new and unique ways to document and educate about the history of the Holocaust? I'm delighted to be moderating in this year's event, Nathan Hilu, Art as Memory After the Holocaust. Tonight, we will learn about the newly released documentary, Nathan-ism, and be in conversation with director Elan Golod and Melanie Vi Levy. For 70 years, Nathan Hilu was unable to stop drawing, flooded with memories from the days when the U.S. military assigned him to guard top Nazi war criminals at the Nuremberg trials, keeping them from committing suicide before their verdict was announced. Born to a Syrian Jewish family that immigrated to the States, Hilu remembered with vivid clarity the encounters that changed his life. But what really happened in Nuremberg? Did his vivid memories deceive him? This film is very special to us here at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center because we have a large collection of Nathan Hilu's pieces in our archive, over 1,000, almost 2,000. And so to kick off this event, we begin with a short clip from the film. I'm honored to introduce our presenters. After first being exposed to filmmaking during his military service in Israel, Elan Golod worked in the New York film industry as an editor on a wide range of projects and as a short-form documentary director. After being part of the editing team on Mike Birbiglia's film Sleepwalk with Me, Elan co-directed and edited the documentary short Mike Birbiglia, How to Make Whatever This Is. While working on his feature documentary, Nathan-ism, he also co-edited Birbiglia's Don't Think Twice and Maya Zeinstein's documentary Till Kingdom Come. He is the director of Nathan-ism. Melanie Levy is a documentary editor, producer, and director based in New York. As a documentary filmmaker, she was lead editor on the NEH-funded feature film Hillbilly. She has contributed as an editor to feature films including What She Said, The Art of Pauline Kael, Wonder Woman, The Untold Story of American Superheroines, and United Skates, and Fern Perlstein's The Last Laugh, among other feature projects. She has directed and edited award-winning short documentaries, which have been broadcast on POV and played at international festivals, including True False, Big Sky, Palm Springs. She is currently directing and producing her first feature documentary film, Untitled Ping Chong Documentary, in partnership with co-director Ben Wu and producer Jamie Doby, and with support from CEM, ITVS, DDF, Forward Just Films, and the Mellon Foundation. She holds a BFA in drama from NYU Tisch School of the Arts and an MFA in documentary film and video from Stanford University, and she is a producer on Nathan-ism. Elan, Melanie, welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for having us. We're so honored to be here.
So, Elan, I went through my emails to figure out when we were first in conversation about Nathan Hilu. And I found that you had first emailed me in February of 2015, introducing the documentary project and inquiring as to whether any of Nathan's art was on display because you wanted to film Nathan walking through the museum, observing his own work, as well as to scan some pieces in our collection. And you, I believe, came that March without Nathan, and then again in 2018. But I'm sure that this was very far from the beginning of the project. Could you tell us how all of this came to be?
Sure. Actually, February 2015 is relatively close to the beginning of this process. I think it was end of 2014. Melanie and I were in conversation about, projects to potentially collaborate on. I was looking for, at that point, an idea for a short documentary, and I had come across an article about an exhibition that Nathan Hilu had at the museum at Hebrew College in Manhattan. And I was initially just struck by the circumstances of his life story, being an 18-year-old Jewish kid from the Lower East Side who suddenly was learning about the Holocaust while having to guard the people who perpetrated it. And I was like, what does that do to a person to have that kind of experience? And I was also fascinated by his artwork because he spent pretty much his entire life after that experience trying to visually document his experiences in Nuremberg. And they have a very sort of childlike, youthful, vibe to them, which, is not what you typically see in Holocaust-related art. He's dealing with very somber subjects with colorful Crayola colors, and it just felt very cinematic and a new way of telling a Holocaust story. So I got his information and I cold called him and slowly built up a relationship with him, which ended up lasting for the last about 4 years of his life. And yeah, it led me on this journey of this film, which did not end up being a short film. It became something much larger, and Melanie's sort of been there alongside me as I've shaped this film over the last 8 years or so.
Yeah, I was impressed by the accuracy of that 2015 email. It's exactly right. That was right at the beginning. So,
And Melanie, could you talk a little bit, just about what it was like when you first started, like when you came on board, what your role was initially?
absolutely. Yeah. Well, Elan is a really wonderful editor in his own right. And I had been also coming with that background as well. And I felt really lucky. He helped me with the film I was working on. Not entirely unrelated. It was about my father's Jewish community in Jamaica, in Kingston, Jamaica, and the synagogue there, the community there. So we knew we loved working together, which is always great. And yeah, it was around that time that he presented this article and this conversation. And I mean, my first question is sort of what was going to be the guiding relationship in the film. And I think that relationship between Elan and Nathan ended up becoming a part of the journey in the film as well. But I think in addition to what Elan just said, the possibility of Nathan's story, his artwork and his perspective, bringing the archival of the Nuremberg trial to modern audiences through the film was from the start really, really exciting and potent to me. And I always thought if Elan was able to develop that strand, it would be this incredible opportunity to see the Nuremberg and not only the trials themselves unfold through Nathan's memories of them, but also to bring this kind of question of memory and how we shape history to audiences to kind of consider. And I think Elan did a really wonderful job in crafting those questions as a central part of the story.
To just comment on some things that you guys have said, I 100% agree, Elan, about the style for sure of Nathan's work, but that idea of darkness, because we've worked at our center with a lot of survivor artists or second generation Holocaust survivors, and they're so dark, like literally dark colors, blacks, grays. It's very somber and mournful. And I hadn't thought about that perspective with his artwork. There's so much light, especially because he usually is using white backgrounds, as his kind of his templates, and then these bright colors, like childlike crayons, markers, like of a child, as opposed to, I haven't seen too many, I don't think, with paint. It usually was like markers and inks. Definitely. And then Melanie, like, you're so right with the perspective of the Nuremberg trials. We all have these images of the Nuremberg trials in our mind, but it's always the view of someone up on the stand, whether they're being interviewed or, making claims. I never thought about what was happening behind the scenes to these prisoners and when they're not on view. So it is this completely unique angle that is so interesting in Nathan's story. I want to talk first. Oh, I'm sorry, please go on.
No, and all of our mental images of the Nuremberg trials are from this archival, which is black and white, and Nathan's work is anything but that. So it was just a new way of seeing the history of the trials.
Such a great point. It really brought it to life instead of it just being history. It's like this reminder that people were there and experiencing, getting it beyond the textbook, I guess, right? I want to talk a moment about how the KHC came to be in possession of Nathan's art. So I called Dr. Arthur Fluke, who was the center's second director, and he said he wasn't quite sure of the dates, but he said sometime around 2007, a friend of his who lived on the Lower East Side called him and said that there was someone that he needed to meet because of his unique artwork. And so he visited him at this home for the aging he said it's right by the Williamsburg Bridge, right? And Arthur commented on how, I guess it was like an assisted living type of place, right? He commented on how when he walked into the lobby, how it was so clean. And he had these preconceived notions of what it was going to be like going into the building. He was like, oh, it's so clean. This is such a nice place, so fancy. But then when he got to Nathan's door, he said he rang the bell, and from inside he heard, "Stand back." And then the door opened and a shopping cart came out full of art and art supplies. And like that came out, he said maybe even two. And then Arthur was able to enter this apartment where he found Nathan just stacked from the floors to the ceiling with artwork. And just, I think he said he was like sitting amid his supplies. Does that sound about right as someone who's been in his apartment?
I mean, I can definitely picture that image. I think in my case, while I knew him, pretty much every time I would visit him, he would give me a shopping bag full of drawings. So his apartment wasn't quite as full of drawings because he just found people who would take his work, including your center and other, the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress has a huge collection. And I mean, in an ideal world, Nathan didn't want to hold on to his work. He wanted it just to be out in the world and, being seen. So I'm guessing Arthur caught him at a point where he had a lot of his work in his apartment.
He was trying to move it. I do remember like getting packages from Nathan because he has such a distinct handwriting where he was, I think, constantly throwing things in envelopes and mailing them off to us. And so Arthur said he was very intrigued by Nathan in general and by the artwork. And he went back to visit him again and brought Rabbi Eisenberg, who, as Laura mentioned before in the intro, was the curator, the scholar in residence for the center for the time that Arthur was here. And he curated all of our exhibitions. And he said that something happened and Nathan did not like the rabbi and kicked him out. But they still wanted to do something. And Arthur said that he didn't know what he wanted to do with the art. He didn't feel like it was going to make sense for the types of exhibitions that we had typically been having at that point, but that he brought him in and had he brought in a bunch of easels, and in our glass box area made a small exhibition for him. And Nathan came, and like 50 people were there, and he said there was like refreshments, and Nathan was very happy. And I think the sense I got from Arthur was that he felt like he had done a mitzvah because he knew Nathan's work. Nathan wanted his work to be seen, and Arthur didn't know if it was good artwork, but he saw that there was something important there. And he also said that he questioned, the validity of some of it, but he still was like, this is important, and he brought it into our space. And of course, as you know, we have a piece of Nathan's work in our core exhibition, which covers like life before the Holocaust leading up to liberation, that any person that enters our space will see. It's one of the ones from the Nuremberg trials. And there was also a small video that played on loop that showed a number of his other pictures. So it's always kind of been part of our work. Did you feel like in some ways this was a mitzvah project for you? Like what motivated you to document his work in this way?
I don't think it was my initial reasoning for entering Nathan's life and his story, but as the relationship developed, I could see, how important I was for him in his life, and also how important the outlet of making this film was for him in allowing him to tell his story. And yeah, there were certain points in the filmmaking process where I was like, do we have enough material? Do we not? But he just got so excited whenever I brought my camera to film him and get to tell his stories that I just continued, and that relationship aspect is also a core part of the film.
And it's very clear. It's very clear he's talking to you, I think, through the whole film. I mean, you hear your voice right in the beginning responding to him, but it seems like it very much became like a relationship there where he, I don't know, wanted to prove to you and explain to you all the things that he had witnessed, which is really interesting and beautiful. I really feel that this documentary is such a unique piece because here at the center, we get tons of inquiries about Holocaust documentaries all the time are being produced, and all these stories are so important and need to be documented. But this one, I feel like, comes at it from a slightly different angle. It's not just letting a person speak. It's really just like analyzing, why he created the artwork, like what was his motivation behind it, and this idea of art as memory. I wonder about his work being labeled as art, or if it's more of like a visual diary. I don't know. I mean, from your relationship, if he felt he was an artist, or if this was just him journaling, as he talks about in the film.
I mean, I think that this is the question that comes up with a lot of quote unquote outsider artists who are, artists who work outside of the mainstream art world.
In all genres.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I accept the question. I do think there is validity to his artistic expression, whether it's, labeled as fine art or visual journal or whatever. But yeah, I think his story combined with the images gives these objects, some of which I have here. Like, I mean, like this is literally on a mailer envelope, and he gave this to me stuffed with other works. And yeah, it's an interesting way of documenting his life. And I mean, I personally love his pieces, but
I do too. I mean, they're very powerful in person. I mean, they're fun to look at. I mean, and there's something to that. I don't mean that, lightly. I mean, like it really fills you up to see, and there's so many details that you wouldn't notice. And I just wanted to say, an audience member, I think, asked at a screening, recently, what's the difference between a historian's function and an artist's function? And I thought that was a really good question. And I think we kind of talked about how, an artist or a work of art it can bring up questions rather than answers. And also how, a work of art is kind of maybe focused on the in-between a little more than history can be. And so I really appreciate that as well, as just something about it coming from Nathan's like deep within, that compulsion to create. I think that says it all. When you have that need, inevitably, even if unfortunately it takes a lifetime to achieve, I do feel it ends up having some value. I believe in that. I also wanted to just add, if I can just say one more thing. I love the point you brought up earlier about Nathan's relationship to Elan and whether it was a mitzvah. And I just wanted to say, for me, what's been wonderfully surprising is how the film has touched people around and brought up questions around how we can listen to our elders, and that the loneliness that can come with aging. And then this question of boundaries, because, hey, there's a lot of people in our world that aren't that easy to deal with, but have really great stories to tell and really important experiences to convey. Are we going to just not go there because they're difficult, for whatever reason, both the stories and maybe by personality? Or can we find a way to follow? I mean, honestly, I think Elan kind of set a great example for people, because he doesn't, if I can go on a little longer, he didn't turn away. What in this film you would see, he doesn't turn away when things get complicated or uncertain or tricky. He just listens and he comes back, and then it evolves and he finds the answers. And I wish we could all, I think it's very interesting.
These are such points about, just about testimony and collecting it. And you're right, it can be challenging, especially as people get older and there's cognitive issues, and especially if it's contested histories, that can be very challenging. And I was privileged to meet Nathan in person once, and it was a very intense meeting. I can only describe him as this powerhouse of energy. He just came into the center shouting. He came in from the very far door, and he was just like, hello, hello. And he shouted that all the way until he got to the offices. And I was like, who is this? And he was looking for Arthur, and he was in distress about his work and where it should go. And I think he brought more to donate. But you could just tell there was a presence about him. He needed to talk. He had things to share. And I don't know if I could say that he felt that he was important or anything like that. I don't know if I could assume that, but there was just a lot of personality for sure. And that is just a testament to you being able to befriend him in the way that you did, that he wanted to talk to people, but you can tell from the way he's interacting with you that he's sharing on a very personal level. He's not coming at it with this intensity, you have to listen to me. I only have your attention for a moment. I think you can see in the film that he felt safe, and he knew that you were listening and that you cared. And there's a softer side to him than from what I saw in that brief moment when he didn't know who I was. And
I've definitely had the experience that you've had. And I think, unfortunately, I get the sense that Nathan had a lifetime of sort of being cast aside by people who, were a little put off by his non-typical demeanor. And I think the value of making this film over a long stretch of time and having literally years to spend with him is that we were able to get him to, be more vulnerable and kind of shed that harder outer shell. And yeah, that was, yeah.
Definitely. What do you think? Should we go to the second clip now?
That's actually a good teaser, since that case is in your archives.
Right, I recognize it right away. And I have to comment on how cool it was that you took Nathan's art and animated it. I just thought that that like brought the story to life in so many ways because I felt like it was like you were watching things play out in his head on the screen. It was such a beautiful technique that I found really really interesting. And so this clip helps to give a little more context as to like what Nathan observed for people that haven't seen the film yet. And that goes to the first question that we have in the chat that was asking if you could tell us about how Nathan, uh, what he was doing at the Nuremberg trial. Is there anything you want to add a little bit to that since he briefly introduced it? But how would you summarize that for someone that's like interested in seeing this film and like wanting to know who Nathan was?
The film goes into this more, but during the trials, Nathan was stationed by the US Army as one of the prison guards inside the prison where the defendants were being held during the trial. So each defendant each day had a US Army guard watching him at all times to make sure that the defendants didn't commit suicide, and make sure that they could, be in good health to stand trial. And Nathan had that experience of being face to face with these top Nazis who were being tried at Nuremberg.
Amazing. So again, this like really unique perspective. Here we have a young man who is 17, right? He's
18.
He's 17, 18. He's enlisted in the army. He gets sent and he does this like task that I don't think anyone's thought about, that like the role that would have played. So it's really, really interesting. I was hoping we could talk a little bit about memory. Now, Laura, who we just saw in that film clip, she talks about the urgency in his artwork and about this like need for him to keep producing the art. And I'm curious, like, one, who you think he was producing the art for, and that may change over time with his motivations for in different moments at different ages in his life, different times in his life, and just about, I mean, memory in general. Memory is malleable, right? It can be influenced if we see or if we experience an event, but then see or hear other things about that event. That additional information can become entwined with our memory, and we do hear about it with the Holocaust. And it is challenging, especially when we're collecting testimony from survivors of any atrocity, but particularly of the Holocaust, years, decades later from when they experienced it. And we can see this observing testimony that's been collected at multiple times in someone's life, right? How not that necessarily the story changes, but details can be less vivid, or there might be a hyper focus on one particular event. They may completely forget other parts. Dates that numbers can be so tricky as we age just to remember those specifics. So there's just a lot there with his memory. And I'm wondering, since you have seen so much of his work, did you see a change, like an evolution in the artwork?
Interesting. In the artwork, the artwork itself is fairly consistent. Maybe a little bit over time. But yeah, obviously the malleability of memory, without giving away too much, it does end up being a theme in the film. And I wanted to bring the audience sort of along the ride with my own experience. And that's sort of why I am part of the film. So I'm sort of the audience's entree into experiencing Nathan's stories. And yeah, it is hard to separate exactly what are his experiences, and that sort of becomes part of the film takes on a bit of a mystery aspect to it.
I will say, one thing that comes to mind when you ask this great question too is this idea of collective memory, what we remember of something that happened in the long ago past. And, what's really interesting about Nathan's storytelling in the film is he brings to light this chapter in American history where America didn't know about the Holocaust. Even the Jewish people, Nathan's a Jewish guy, grew up in the Lower East Side, right? So you would, it's something that's always kind of lost to me when I think about the Holocaust. I learned about the history of the Holocaust, but when hearing Nathan's story, you're reminded that Nuremberg was actually the moment where everyone was awakened to the atrocities of the Holocaust. And so seeing that through Nathan's eyes is really telling, I think. It's like even American Jews weren't necessarily aware to the trauma that was taking place as it was unfolding all the time. And that's a part of history that I think doesn't always, there's so many corners of history that I think you don't necessarily know unless you hear the full telling of it. So I don't know, just interesting thinking about memory and stuff.
And what do you think about who he produced the art for? I mean, it's clear in the film that he's very excited that you're filming him, and he keeps talking about when the film comes out. Like, who do you think he wanted to see it? Was it his peers? Or was it the next generation? Was it that kind of fear, like knowing he wasn't going to be around forever?
I mean, he does talk about, documenting Nuremberg and his life story for future generations and for a wide audience. But at the same time, I think just the making of the work was in some form therapeutic for himself. And, he needed to do this work, whether anybody was going to see it or not. He would, I literally never was in his apartment and he wasn't busy drawing a piece. And, he would finish the piece, tell me about it, put it aside and start on the next piece. It was just such a compulsion that, he just had all these memories, and, I would expect some form of PTSD from his experience at Nuremberg. And, he had to sort of exercise those demons, and just like get it out on paper.
I think also the film, speaking of that PTSD experience, like the memories do get a little fuzzy. So the film actually, I think Elan, you do a really good job of asking that very question of how do you handle history when the memories get fuzzy? And what do you do if some things are completely true and some things are impossible to confirm, even if it's just a product of time and the evidence fades away? So that's like a really important question that I think people can be talking about now. That's about, Holocaust memory and all sorts of things,
It's interesting because thinking about post-traumatic stress, I feel like this artwork is just it on paper. And it's like, that trauma is such a difficult thing to express verbally. I mean, we see it in the body actions, but like it's on the paper. And, for me being an educator at the center, students visiting would always be particularly compelled by that artwork. We have a number of Holocaust survivor art pieces in the exhibit, and they all function very differently. They're documenting a moment of time. They're from this kind of outside omniscient perspective, just kind of looking in, haunted types of ghostly figures and things like that. But there's something so chaotic about his artwork and almost like graphic novel like that I feel like students would always be intrigued by it. And also this idea of like a survivor, because would you classify, he wasn't a liberator, right? He was, when he just had this other task as an army member. So he didn't, but he was so traumatized without even seeing action, which is interesting. Right. Just being in the presence of the most evil people in the world, being in their presence it seems is what caused trauma.
Yeah. I mean, he did see sort of the aftermath of the Holocaust, just being in Germany post-war. And, Nuremberg was in rubble when he was there. And he did, it didn't make it into the film, but he did talk about seeing some of the displaced persons camps and, seeing like some of the survivors but yeah, he was not one of the liberators. He just was too young to be in Europe when the war actually ended. But yeah, just hearing the testimonies and like the reading the transcripts of the trials as they were happening was, I think, was enough to leave him with, traumatic experience for the rest of his life.
In the chat, you can find, we linked to the Nathan-ism website. Could you just, I want to make sure people know this. How can people view the film? Where do you have any upcoming screenings? Can they find that all on that website?
We're in the process of updating the website. Our next few screenings we have next week. We have 2 screenings in Washington, D.C., which I will be at. And June 6th, we have a screening at the Center for Jewish History in Manhattan. And we're also excited, and I think it's very symbolic. We're having 2 screenings at a festival in Kiev in Ukraine, which, takes, the idea of like international justice to another level. I also want to point out that we had the very special experience a few months ago of screening the film inside the courtroom in Nuremberg, and, hearing Nathan's words in the very room where the Nazis were put on trial was, a very moving experience for me and also for the German audience who was there.
That must have been so powerful.
Yeah.
I can't imagine space like that.
And the film will have a theatrical release in New York, LA, and hopefully across the country this fall, and will be online towards the end of the year.
How has it been received so far from the screenings that you've done? What's the reception that you've been getting from people?
I mean, it's been a fascinating ride taking the film to festivals across the country. It's overall, it's been amazing, amazingly received in, places that have a very large Jewish population, and also in, we played in a festival in Arkansas where I don't think there were any Jews in the audience, and it still spoke to them in sort of universal way without having the baggage of Jewish experience. So yeah, I think it's beautiful to see that Nathan's story is like out in the world and people are finally recognizing him.
Awesome. So Nathan passed a few years ago now, right? And first I want to offer condolences to you both, because it's so clear how much of a bond that you created through this process. I mean, it's clear that you became like family to him. I mean, when you watch the film and you see all the birthdays that you celebrated with him, I think he really looked at you like family. And so I have kind of 2 questions pertaining to Nathan's legacy. So he never saw the final film, right? So one question is, what do you think his reaction would have been if he had been able to see the film? What do you think he would have thought about how he was portrayed in the story? And then second, since Nathan passed while you were still working on the film, did that impact like the direction of the film? Do you think that there are changes that you made in the way you presented the information that would have been different if you knew he was going to see it?
That's a good question. That's a question I probably discussed with my therapist at some point. Yeah, I don't. It's hard to answer that question. I mean, it definitely, in one way or another, it definitely shapes the film and the trajectory of the film. I would like to think that Nathan would have appreciated the film that we make, because, while it does deal with some complex aspects of his story, at the end of the day, it does champion him as an artist and a storyteller whose voice needs to be heard. He did get to see certain scenes as I was editing them and some of the raw footage, and he lit up whenever he saw himself on screen, and he was very excited by the whole process. So I would like to think that he would enjoyed seeing the film in a theater had that been possible, but unfortunately he passed before we finished the film.
What do you think, Melanie? Because I know you were very connected to this, but probably not in the same way that Elan was, being in the space with him.
It's true. I mean, my role was more just watching the pieces of the film as they evolved and kind of advising on the story as how it came together. So it's a really interesting question. I really feel that the film honors Nathan's work and honors his perspective in this way that I really just hope he could see and appreciate if he saw the film on the whole.
And I think he would have been excited that, slowly but surely the film is also gonna, garner some interest in his actual artwork. I mean, we have, we're starting to get interests from a few galleries who are interested in showing his work. So hopefully there's more life both for the film and for his artwork in the world. And I think that's our way of honoring his legacy.
We do a lot of work with interns, bringing them in to meet survivors, and Arthur Flug, our past director, always had this saying that the students were insurance policies for the survivors, and that they found comfort in that, knowing that their stories would live on. And I think that this film definitely, if nothing else, it does that. Like, he is immortalized on the screen. His artwork is documented. If his greatest desire was to be an artist, he is an artist in that sense for this film. And yeah, I mean, you've created a legacy that maybe he was unable to attain in his life, but it exists now.
It's been so powerful. Just I saw the film once, and then I saw it again on Saturday night. And thank you so much. It was had its debut at the Lower East Side Film Festival, and it was really powerful to be there. And I think at this moment right now in America, and certainly across the world, I think one of the critical pieces that we're wrestling with as we start to see even more Holocaust denial and the rise in anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination and hate, but particularly anti-Semitism in this moment, I think it's really critical that this film is focusing on a different part of Holocaust memory that also makes the Holocaust relevant. So we're not just remembering the past, but we're making it relevant for a new generation of people who may not have any experience with this history, and certainly are not connected to people who have had survivors in their family or second generation survivors. And that's one of the most meaningful parts of seeing the film, and then also recognizing that our center has a large repository of Nathan's art. And so one of the things we're hoping is that as the film gets out into the world even more, that we'll be able to showcase more of this art and hopefully have some more scholars come and take a look at it. We've documented it at least. And I just want to thank you, Elan and Melanie and Marissa, for just having a wonderful conversation about this really unique film and to talk about Nathan's legacy on this very important day, Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, where we're really trying to not just remember the past, but connect the past to the present because it's more relevant than ever. So on behalf of the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, thank you all so much. And thank you to everyone who tuned in this night. And we hope you stay safe and be well. Thank you.